One's dignity may be assaulted, vandalized, and cruelly mocked, but cannot be taken away unless it is surrendered. Michael J. Fox. Yo, guys, what is going on? It is bright and early on this Monday, August 10th. I believe this is actually the 10th episode of TTP, so welcome back, all you returning viewers, and welcome to the pod, all you new ones. It's our fourth week. We're very excited. We have big things planned. And today we'll be talking about one of the more memorable games in recent NFL memory, the so-called Bounty Gate game.
So today we are going to be looking at the 2009 NFC Championship game, Saints versus Vikings. Now, at this time, the Vikings had Brett Favre, who had pondered retirement at least 2 times before this. Now, this was Brett Favre's final full season. He was 40 years old, and it was his final chance to make the Super Bowl. On the Saints side of things, you have a young Drew Brees and a young team in general looking to make their first Super Bowl with that team. And this was in the midst of the infamous Saints bounty scandal. So we see a lot of brutal hits from this team, and the way this game went, there were a lot of turnovers, not much offense that was really fluid that you could see, like in a Rams-Chiefs game, for example. So it was an overall pretty sloppy game. So we're going to be looking at the breakdowns for both team seasons, and then we're going to just be looking at the game in general. So, Chirag, why don't you tell us about the Saints season?
Yes, the Saints had an amazing season. They went 13-3, which was actually the first time since 2006 where they made the playoffs. So at this point, the Saints were trying to, in some ways, rebuild, especially because with their new coach, or not their new coach, but for a while, this team had been not doing so well. Good season would have been over 500, but this season they went 13-3. And this is really when their offense exploded. So they were first in points for, but then their defense, they were 20th. And as you guys know, Greg Williams headed this defense, and we'll get into that a bit later, but it had a really big impact on this game, especially with Brett Favre's health. But we'll get into that a bit later. So in the Saints team, we obviously have Drew Brees, Hall of Fame quarterback. He had an amazing season once again. 34 TDs, 11 interceptions, 4,388 yards, 70% completion rate. Just what you expect from Drew Brees. Very stable quarterback, throws the right passes, gets the touchdowns. And it really showed throughout the season. They had a lot of blowout games, a lot of games that they just control possessions with. And that was their style that they've kept till now, especially in 2019. We saw a lot of Drew Brees just trying to maintain leads, maintain the clock. So looking at their skill position players, they basically read a 3-headed monster of Mike Bell, Pierre Thomas, and Reggie Bush, all very young running backs, around 25 years old. And they were really successful in running the ball late in games and just managing the clock, especially in the playoffs we see against the Cardinals. They were very effective in this strategy. Then when we look at their receivers, we obviously have Marcus Colston, amazing, wide receiver for this Saints franchise. Then we have Devery Henderson, another guy that picked up the slack. And then at tight end, they had Jeremy Shockey, David Thomas. Just not very notable, but their blocking schemes were really impressive on this team. So they had a very big impact. And then when we look at their defense, they had a very impressive secondary led by Darren Sharper. Not to get anything personal, but this season he had 9 interceptions, which was I haven't seen that in a while. But there's Darren Sharper, and then at safety there's Roman Harper. They have Tracy Porter, obviously, their lead cornerback. Jonathan Vilma at linebacker, and then Will Smith, RIP, at defensive end. So when we look at this team, it's a very balanced team, obviously led by Sean Payton, great offensive coach, and he just leads teams, especially in recent seasons. But when we look at their playoff push, I thought it was the most interesting, especially against the Cardinals. There was nothing really overwhelming about this game, and statistically, it seemed like both teams performed the same offensively. But when we look at the time possession, I believe the Saints had the ball for 13 minutes more than the Cardinals. And that's really what, in recent seasons, that's what we saw a lot more. Obviously there were some injuries. We saw Matt Leinart, shout out to that USC team.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll drop down the bio. USC beat Texas. Amazing game.
Oh yeah,
Matt Leinart.
Matt Leinart versus Reggie Bush. It's good to see.
Yeah.
And then after that game, the Saints go against the Vikings. And let's get into that team a bit more with Keshav.
So with the Vikings, in this 2009 season, the season before they had won 10-6, and they had lost in the wild card round. And it seemed that they did have a missing piece at their quarterback position. And at that time, their quarterback was, his last name is Rohit. But yeah, he wasn't a very good quarterback. So the Vikings, who were in talk with Brett Favre for a while, bring him in as he signs really a long time after training camp on August 18th. And Brett Favre at this time is 40 years old. So he had a tough season with the Jets before this. They went 9-7, failed to make the playoffs. And he had pondered retirement again, but once he chose to go with the Vikings, he surprised us all. And actually, it's interesting to note that he retired as many times as Michael Jordan after the last season with the Packers in 2007, with the Jets in 2008, and in the Vikings in 2010, after this year, basically. And Favre, throughout his career, was a complicated player. In his time with the Packers, he developed a Vicodin addiction, which he had to be treated with rehab for. And his only Super Bowl was won in 1997 with the Packers when they beat the Patriots 35-21. And Favre had made the playoffs a lot of times, but he had failed to, really get that second Super Bowl win a lot of those times. So this was actually just a huge opportunity for him with the Vikings, getting to play with Adrian Peterson, also first-round pick Percy Harvin. And on the defensive end for this team, they had defensive legend Jared Allen and a young Trad Greenway. And they were a top 10 defense in the league. And looking at Brett Favre statistically this season, he had 4,200 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 7 picks. Now, if you just look at Brett Favre's stats in general throughout his career, he was always known for throwing a decent amount of picks, if anything. So only 7 picks this season was the lowest in his entire career, actually. And he had his highest completion percentage in his career of 68.4%. So it was an overall very, I would say, efficient season for Brett Favre, and something that really surprised people considering his age, at that time was 40 years old. And along with him was Adrian Peterson, who was also one of the best running backs in the league. He had nearly 1,400 yards this season with 18 touchdowns. And he also had one of his best seasons as a pass catcher, and that could probably be thanks to having Brett Favre as his quarterback. He had 436 yards, not much, but it's best if you're comparing it to his other seasons. And in the end, this team went 12-4, and they finished first in the NFC North, one game ahead of Favre's former team, the Green Bay Packers. And he beat his former team twice this season. The former team who abandoned him for Aaron Rodgers twice this season. And actually, an interesting story about this is that Favre had been talking with the Vikings before, but to avoid this tampering, so-called tampering, the Packers actually offered him money for retiring, so this tampering would technically stop.
I'm real quick on that point. I'm kind of confused. So, did he accept that money? He obviously did retire. Obviously, he came back.
Let me look.
Did he accept that money? I mean, if he accepted that money, I'm sure it would have been a whole nother deal. But
I think if he accepted that money, there would have to be some sort of contractual thing, right, that he can't sign with another team.
Yeah, it would also probably.
I don't know how it would work. because as you were saying
Yeah.
earlier, retiring is like a loose term, so that's interesting. I don't know. But yeah, overall, Brett Favre had actually gone through a lot of wear and tear throughout his career. He actually mentions that, in 2013, he was actually considering again. There were people were considering that he may return to the league again with the St. Louis Rams. But, Favre said that, the NFL had really done a lot of damage on him. He was suffering from memory loss. So, at this stage in his career, for him to do this well, it's really surprising. But overall, this Vikings team, very good on offense, like with Brett Favre, Adrian Peterson, and the dual threat player that Percy Harvin is, whose speed made him a great returner, also someone that you could, maybe hand the ball off to every now and then. But overall, a very solid player for the Vikings. And now looking up to that 2009 NFC Championship game, in the first round of the playoffs, the Vikings dominated the Cowboys 34-3 in the divisional round. And yeah, this game wasn't even close. So going into that Saints game, you think that the Vikings really have a chance at, Brett Favre, especially at 40 years old, has a chance to make another Super Bowl. The Vikings, and it would be a big game for the Vikings itself. So now Rohit's going to talk a little bit about the game itself.
Yeah, so there were some things mentioned about this game earlier. At the very beginning, Keshav mentioned a lot of turnovers, a lot of sloppiness, still high scoring. But I'll quickly give you a rundown of what happened in this game before we look at the specific details. So the final score of this game was 31-28 Saints. We'll just leave it there. People already know that the Saints won the Super Bowl this year. This game itself was really close the entire way. It was never the game was always within one touchdown either way. Minnesota was up by a touchdown for a little bit. By the end of the game, the Saints were up by a touchdown. Fourth quarter is finally tied up. But the turnovers were the big story of this game. So with the Minnesota Vikings, they had 6 fumbles this game, and 3 of those were lost. And that's not even including the 2 interceptions thrown by Brett Favre. You have 5 turnovers from this side, and then New Orleans had a fumble of their own, which was lost on a muff punt by Reggie Bush. So there's 6 turnovers in this game. And Keshav, I don't know if you covered this, but Minnesota was actually the third lowest in turnovers this year with, I believe, 18. Yeah. So to have 5 in this one game is staggering, right? Their entire game plan is ruined, right? You have a third of your season's turnovers in just one game here in the playoffs. But one thing that really caught my eye with all these turnovers, and I'll get into that, how this game ended later, but because I wanted to talk about the turnovers, which led to the end of this game. 5 turnovers, but the Saints only scored on one of those turnovers. So when we look at these turnovers, we have 2 picks from Brett Favre. Brett Favre also lost a fumble, which really should have been credited to Adrian Peterson. It was a handoff that was lost. Then you had a Percy Harvin fumble at the the beginning of the fourth quarter, and then a Bernard Berrien, not a name familiar to a lot of casual football fans, but he had a great game, 9 catches, 102 yards. He lost a critical fumble as well. The only score was after that Percy Harvin fumble, and that was pretty much just because it was at their own 15-yard line, or the opposing 15-yard. 10-yard line for the Saints. So they had an easy score there. A lot of these other touchdowns didn't work out so well. Bernard Berrien, a lot of these touchdowns didn't help the Saints offense as much as it hurt the Vikings offense. Bernard Berrien fumbles in the red zone. Adrian Peterson, I guess Brett Favre fumbles in the red zone. Some of these picks at the very end of the game where the Vikings were threatening to score a game-winning field goal, interception, and that obviously cost them, could have cost them the game. I don't know if the field goal would have worked out. And then the first interception by Brett Favre is a really critical one. Now, we've talked about how this is the Bountygate scandal game. This is where all of that came to light. If you guys search this up, I don't know if we're going to have a video for this or not here, but if you guys search up Brett Favre, Vikings, Saints, bounty hits, you're going to see some compilations of some of the dirty hits the Saints had on him. This isn't a video, to be honest, for Saints fans, or I don't even know if Vikings fans want to see this one, but Saints fans, Bounty Gate, this was a real deal. This 100% was a thing. Like I said, on that first pick, it was thrown to Jonathan Vilma. And right after this, Brett Favre had to leave the game. This was at the end of the third quarter because of some dirty hits by some Vikings players, or by some Saints players, namely Remy Iodele and Bobby McCray. Those guys had been going after him to a couple of defensive linemen. High-low hit, knocks him out temporarily with an ankle injury. And it was pretty obvious. These were late hits and 100% would not be legal in today's, I guess, softer NFL, which honestly is best for the health of these players. But yeah, just a lot of dirty hits in this game. Compilation, it's tough to watch. Brett Favre at this point is 40 years old. He should not be, this is just not safe for him. He's been playing for a long time. You can understand why he was addicted to Vicodin. Like, straight up. This is why he was addicted to Vicodin. Things
and
like
also,
this.
I mean, the turnovers, I think you were saying a couple of them in the red zone. 4 of them were in New Orleans territory, right? So the Vikings, only one of them actually came when Minnesota was, just in their own territory. And that was that one fumble
By Percy
Harvin. Yeah, that was the only one. But the rest of them came when they were actually marching down the field, which is, hard to see them really mess up the game like that.
Yeah, and if you look at Brett Favre's numbers for this game, 28-46, 310 yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks, it wasn't good, right? A lot of their yards came off of penalties. New Orleans had 9 penalties for 88 yards. And then Adrian Peterson had, I believe, 125 or 122 rushing yards. So Brett Favre didn't have his greatest game. Even Peterson, who had 122 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, he had some fumbling issues. He fumbled it. I'm going to count the Brett Favre fumble as Peterson's fumble. It was kind of split, but 3 fumbles for Adrian Peterson and 1 lost. He would definitely, I can guarantee Adrian Peterson probably has some regret about this game, all those fumbling issues. But let's get back to the results of this game. So I mentioned Brett Favre threw an interception at the end of this game. With about less than 10 seconds, about 6 or 7 seconds left, Vikings were not in field goal range. It would have been a 56-yard field goal for a field goal kicker whose career long at this point was 47 yards, Garrett Hartley. Or no. I'm a mistake. Ryan Longley. Ryan Longley's career long at this point. Garrett Hartley is the Saints kicker. Ryan Longley, what was his career long at this point? Ryan Longwell, you mean?
Is it Longwell?
Yeah, it's Longwell. Wait. Garrett Hartley and Ryan Longwell. I was about to say
his career long was 55.
Yeah, so this was on the border there, but again, you don't want to be if you could get the extra yards, you would have taken it. Obviously. Yeah. So it's 6 seconds left. Brett Favre, we mentioned he's a gunslinger. He's prone to the interception. He's rolling out to the right. There's some pressure from the Saints. And I believe the Vikings did have a timeout. So time was an issue, but at least they did have that fallback. So he throws it to the middle of the field because he believes he has an open receiver. Throws it across his body, and you watch the replay of this. It didn't really look right. Favre, even though he's a gunslinger, didn't have the same arm talent as he once did. So making this kind of risky throw with 6 seconds left, a lot of people have given him criticism because maybe he could have ran, right? And he's slow, and 6 seconds isn't that much time, but he could have gotten out of bounds there. He could have slid and called a timeout. Even getting 2 or 3 yards puts them on the border of Ryan Longwell's career long range there. So a lot of criticism there. He throws the interception. The Saints can't do anything with it, obviously, because it's a few seconds left. But it goes to overtime. Keshav, what were you saying?
Also, I think this is just a player I completely forgot to mention when I was talking about the Vikings. But Sidney Rice, who was there, who is Brett Favre's primary receiving target, suffered a hip injury in this game that forced him to exit the game. So,
and Sidney Rice,
he was, he
had a touchdown in this game, I believe. So he made an impact. He was the only receiving touchdown for the Vikings this game. Did you want to say something else about Sidney Rice?
I mean, I guess because I glossed over it. I mean, he had a really good season this year. He had 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. This is definitely his best season of his career. He had a short career, but this one with Brett Favre was arguably the best he had.
Yeah. This was a weird game too. So Sidney Rice gets knocked out of the game. He was productive, 4 catches, 43 for a touchdown before he got knocked out. But then it was a couple other guys who did the damage. Bernard Berrian, like I mentioned, had a critical fumble at the end, but he also had a drawn pass interference, which led to an Adrian Peterson touchdown earlier in the game. I believe that was a game-tying touchdown. Either got them to 28 or 21 points. And then their tight end, Desante Shenko, 4 catches for 83. He had a productive game as well. But anyway, that's the end of the Vikings offensive talk, right? The Brett Favre interception there was their last play on offense of the entire season. And you might question why. You look at the final score, 31-28. Right, there was 3 points scored. Doesn't that mean that the Vikings should have had a chance at the playoffs? No. So this was actually the final year where the playoff rules were different. It was a sudden death kind of style. So whoever got the ball first, they could score a field goal and the game was over. I actually wasn't aware of this. I checked some stuff up and that was the deal there. But Saints win the coin toss in overtime and they get the football. And they slowly march down the football field at about 4 minutes and they get within field goal range for their kicker, Garrett Hartley. Like I mentioned, Hartley's career high at this point was 47 yards. He doesn't have the experience or the leg of Ryan Longwell. So they get in good field goal range for him. And the Vikings don't even have a shot. So 40-yard field goal for Garrett Hartley is through. And yeah, there wasn't a whole lot the Vikings could do about the situation. And then a few months later, they end up switching the rule to where both teams get a shot unless a touchdown is scored. So pretty consequential game in that sense.
Especially for a guy like Brett Favre, gunslinger. It must have been disappointing that he just had to rely on his defense for the overtime. Yeah, it was good they changed it because when I was watching the game, I totally forgot about this rule.
Yeah.
So and randomly they started celebrating after a field goal, and then that was the end of the game. But it makes a lot more sense with the new rules.
I think this was the game that changed the overtime rules, basically, right?
No,
was
yes,
the last? It was the last one.
The last overtime game of the year.
Okay.
Anyway, I was gonna mention this quote by Jonathan Vilma. Vilma says a few months later he's kind of disappointed by this whole rule. He said, "If you read between the lines, we feel like they're saying, well, if Minnesota would have had possession, who knows what would have happened. We don't appreciate that. I don't appreciate it at all. I felt like that was a really stupid statement. Literally, yes, that's what the NFL is trying to do. What does he mean if you read between the lines?"
Yeah, I was talking about Jonathan Vilma. He was offered $10,000 to knock out Brett Favre. Just wanted to add that in.
No, that's it's brutal stuff.
Vilma, we don't really. This Saints defense, Jonathan Vilma, obviously all these bounty gate guys, but then Darren Sharper, who is a pretty violent guy in his own right. So there were some characters on the defense. Greg Williams. I mean, I understand that Vilma's pissed off in some sense, but dude, they won the Super Bowl at Mana. Come on now. Like if his team was in this position, they've definitely been in this position at some point in the last few years, and it only makes sense. I guess the touchdown thing makes sense, but the field goal just for that to end the game is pretty disappointing.
No, and if you see the hit by McCray and Ayodele, McCray after Favre throws the ball, well after it, he just hits him right below the knees, would be a penalty today, and he that's what knocked Favre out of the game with the ankle injury, literally right below the knees.
And it ended up being an ankle injury for him, but came back. Tough guy.
Yeah. Keshav, did you look at the Sidney Rice injury? Do you see what caused that injury? Was it also a dirty hit or something like that?
Let me look real.
Okay, while you're looking, I did want to look at a little bit more of this whole bounty scandal. So Vikings coach Brad Childress, he looked back at this game and he noted there was at least 13 instances where he felt like the Saints explicitly went after Favre and intentionally. So this is why this game is so relevant, is because it was at the revelation of this whole bounty scandal. Obviously, guys get punished. Peyton and Greg Williams. There were some players. I believe Vilma was punished too. So a lot of guys were affected, and this game was pretty good evidence for that. I mean, obviously there was phone calls that exposed things, but the on the field displays here by the Saints were pretty obvious. A lot of just throwing Brett Favre on the ground. And then I don't know if the Sidney Rice thing was that. I don't know if you found that, but
I don't think the Sidney Rice thing had to do with a dirty hit or anything. I'm still looking at the exact details of where it happened, but I'll confirm in a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, but talking about Brett Favre, I'm not sure this is mentioned, but he actually got hit 16 times, which is it's a staggering amount, especially for 4-year-old quarterback like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if Brad Childress is 13. He said at least 13. I don't know exactly what those were based off of, but if that was actually right, if 13 of the 16 hits were intentionally just brutal, not a good look for Greg Williams or any of these defensive players, Bobby McCray, Remy Ayudele.
Actually, I was looking at the Vikings, and they actually set up this not the same, but they set up a bounty program, which was, to a lesser extent, it was like $100 or $200 for injuring some player, but yeah, it was written in Brett Favre's book. He was talking about the 2008-2009 season, so yeah, I'm not sure how normal this is in the NFL, but
also, I mean, the fact that this continued until like 2011 is crazy. I think they were trying to, in that Saints-Niners NFC divisional game, they're trying to injure Frank Gore and Alex Smith as well, but hey, it didn't work out for them, karma for the Saints, everyone says they're super unlucky, every year in the playoffs, but let's be honest, maybe they had it coming to them.
Saints kind of right after this, everything changed. Obviously, you look at the next year, maybe a game we'll look at in the future. The Beastquake game, obviously, with a sub 500 Seahawks team led by Matt Hasselbeck. I would say that was, the Seahawks played great that game. Pete Carroll, great coach. But, if we're talking about karma, that was definitely some karma right there. And then the Vikings have had their number in the playoffs the last few years. They've been underdog both times. And
yeah. I guess it's more Greg Williams than the Saints.
Yeah, Sean Payton is still there, though. Sean Payton,
that's true. Yeah.
That's the culture. And he was aware of this. He was suspended for a year.
Yeah.
Times have changed. This whole thing, this was, 7-8 years ago, the Bounty Gate scandal came to light. So it's a different time, and I will acknowledge it's unfair to say that it's still karma for what they did. To be fair, what they did was terrible. What was the statement they had about Frank Gore? It was like turn his head around or turn his head backward.
Like crack his neck or something. It was pretty bad. It was really bad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, actually, I'll stick with it. They deserve some of this. Again, if you're a Saints fan, I don't blame you if you're not a huge fan of this video. It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be praising the Saints they won the Super Bowl this year. I guess they were the best team in football, but people are going to remember. I feel like people are going to remember 2009 for this whole Bounty Gate scandal, and for the Vikings, Brett Favre, his final productive year. Keshav mentioned his last full year starting. The next year wasn't the same for him. He ended up retiring for the final time, and he's had some conversations about coming back. That's not going to happen. But a good year for the Saints, tough year for the Vikings, but I guess this end of the Brett Favre era for them after pretty much a year of productive football. But I think that'll do it for the 10th episode of TTP. controversial episode. Talked about the bounty, and a lot of things were covered in this episode. But should just about do it. If you guys have anything else to say, feel free to add on. But we will see you on Wednesday. Peace.